Mr. Henry deShields Fisher is the subject of our oral history interview today, September 2nd, 2021, at Mr. Fisher's home in Tappahannock, Virginia. For Essex County Museum and Historical Society, I am David Jett, curator. Howard Reisinger is our videographer. Mr. Fisher, please tell us about your parents and when and where you were born.
I was born in Richmond, 1929, just before the crash. It was a big crash. I was born on 2nd Avenue in Highland Park. My mother had fallen down the steps on Easter Sunday, and I was a breech baby. And the doctor was very concerned about her health and the difficulty in giving a birth. The doctor was playing bridge with his friends, and he got the early word about my mother being pregnant and going to deliver the baby. So he rushed over there to the apartment, and he told the nurse, "You better come with me because this is going to be a very difficult birth." Mother was in labor for over 24 hours, and finally he delivered me. As I said, I was a breech baby, and he handed me to my grandmother deShields because he was looking after my mother. She was losing a lot of blood and thing. It was a very difficult situation. And my grandmother didn't know what to do with me, so she pulled out my mother's lingerie drawer and laid me in there. I was very small, and then she and my grandmother Fisher, both of my grandparents, Fishers and the deShields, were there. And my grandmother deShields took me in my bassinet and took me into the kitchen and opened the oven door. And she lit the oven, and she and my grandmother Fisher had a quilt, and they'd put it over me, over the bassinet for a while, then they'd take it away. Then they'd put it back over me. And they did this for a number of hours, and it was like a
incubator.
Yeah, and it probably saved my life. Anyway, Mother said that 3 days after I was born, she said, all of a sudden I blossomed, and I was the most beautiful child you ever laid your eyes on. I'm sorry I didn't carry it over to today. However, that was the beginning.
So tell me about some of your childhood memories.
My what?
Childhood memories in Richmond and Tappahannock.
Well, first I have to tell you how when I was born, my grandmother deShields became very possessive of me. And she told my mother, she said, you and your husband, you and Charles are young and you go to dances and parties and all like that. She said, why don't you leave deShields here with me and his grandfather? And so they did that. And my crib was in my grandmother and grandfather's bedroom. And so that's how I spent more time there when I was very young. And my parents would come on weekends and visit and see me and so forth and so on. And as I got older, well, first of all, my grandmother died when I was 4 and a half. And that's when my mother and I moved down here full time, and my father would come down on weekends. And because my grandfather was very lonesome, and mother was running the house and so forth, and the housekeeper, Mary Ann, was a black lady, did the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry and all of those kind of things. And so I was there, and we had the family dog, Smut, who was, my father gave Smut to my mother as a part of an engagement gift. He was a little puppy, and he was he was a little round black fur puppy. And of course Smut grew, and then Smut was with me all the time. He was, there are other stories about him, and I'll tell you about. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that's how I happened to be there. Now my playmates were Charles Warner, Dorothy Warner, Polly B. Warner, and Tommy Carthon sometimes. And Polly B. and Charles were older than Dorothy and I. And Tommy Carthon was as old as he and Charles were great friends. And Charles, one of our great things was to go up and down the river shore, and we'd get treasures or shells and all kinds of things that we'd pick up on the river shore. And we were allowed to go down to Hoskins Creek and over to the creek at Miss Hale's house. That creek, I forget the name of it. And but we were warned that we had to get away from Hoskins and get back up to the hotel at high tide, because sometimes the high tide would come in, and because there were cliffs there, there's clay cliffs, and the water could be as high as 2 feet or so forth and so on. So we stayed clear of that at high tide. But and Captain, oh Lord, what was his name? The owner of the hotel would allow us to swim in front of the hotel and things like that. But we were always tramping up and down the shoreline. Mm-hmm. Charles Warner was sort of a leader, and he taught us. We'd sit on the brick fence at the graveyard, the Brokeber graveyard. It was had the peaks on it, and we'd sit on those peaks. Charles would teach us to see Jesus Loves Me, This I Know, and Buffalo, Shuffle Off to Buffalo, and Swanee, and he teaches those songs. Now, at the time where the museum is now, the president, there was a galvanized building of the tin, and it was a feed and a seed and all for farmers. It had a loading dock, the level of a truck, back of a truck or the back of a wagon. Well, on Sunday, nobody was there, so Charles decided that was going to be our stage. So he taught us, he'd set up these little propositions and stories, and we'd have to work out with them and play out them, and it was all just instantaneous, nothing, no lines learned or anything. And if we wanted to do something and the store was open, we'd go up to the courthouse, and we could do the courthouse steps if there was no court session. Mm-hmm. So that was a sort of our playground, Prince Street and all. And
what about school, going to school?
I only got to school on a very short time. I got in the first grade when they built the new school. And the county, it was a WPA project, and the county, the federal government put up so much money, and the county was supposed to put up so much money. Well, a time came when they were getting all the finances together that the town came short. They didn't have $1,000. Was short the money that it was supposed to put up. So my grandfather got on the phone and called Miss A.I. DuPont because they were great friends, and he said, A.I., he said, this is the situation. So he explained it to A.I., and A.I. said, how much? And my grandfather said $1,000. He said, it's in the bank. So that's how that beautiful school got built. And I went to the first grade there. I started, and I remember the auditorium. I was fascinated by the two-story windows that were curved on the top. There were 3 on each side, and there was a balcony. And the stage was there, but the stage didn't really have any wings or much space behind it or around it. It was just a basic stage. And it was quite a day. When they talked about when they had the opening of the school.
Where was that school located?
It was located where the elementary school is located now, and it was a shame because they tore it down, and when that school was built, it took the students from Santa Cross and the other students in up the county, and they all came there to that school. And that was high school and elementary. It was a beautiful school. And when the county decided to tear it down, they had a contract with a demolisher, or whatever you want to call him. And he ran into and did not realize that the school was built out of concrete and steel, whatever it was, and he lost a lot of money in tearing it down. I think the town was very foolish in getting rid of it because it was a beautiful building, and it didn't have that much wrong with it. It had some leaks and they needed to do some repairs, but basically that was it. And of course, when they did it, St. Margaret's was there, the Baptist church was there, choirs, the Methodist church choir was there, and the ministers from the various churches. And A.I. and Miss Jessie DuPont were invited, but they happened to be on a trip in China at the time, so they didn't do it. One of the funny things was when I was a baby, I think I was a little, maybe 2 years old, if that. Miss Jessie DuPont, they came in on the Ninnamucha, as they always did, and they were here. And they stayed at Ms. Hale's because Ms. Hale was Ms. DuPont's aunt. And so she called my grandmother and she said, Lena, I want to see that baby, that new baby, Sarah's new baby. And grandmother said, well, come on over to the house, fine. Well, she came over, and they were giving me a bath in a little tub, and I was naked as a jaybird. And I thought, of course, in those days, I didn't think much about it because I didn't, but anyway, Miss Jessie said I was a beautiful baby, and she reached into her pocketbook and threw in a $20 gold piece in my bath water. I still have that gold piece.
Wow.
But they played, the DuPonts were frequent guests here in the house, and Ms. DuPont, when grandmother was talking about putting mother, going to Richmond for her to come out in society, Miss Jessie said, Richmond is fine, but Sarah could do better in Wilmington. She said, because there are more rich young men up there. So mother went up there, and the grandmother, to the estate, but Nemours. And when we took the trip up there, I saw the bedroom where my mother and grandmother stayed. And anyway, the trip and the house was just gorgeous, and Mother was just so impressed with it, and the garden. And she met a young man who was in New Jersey, I think. He was a psychiatrist. He was young, and he took quite a fancy to Mother, and he would come down, take the train and then the steamboat down, and he would stay at the hotel. And he would come and spend weekends with Mother and so forth and so on. And I asked Mother, I said, why didn't you marry him? She said, well, she said he was a lovely young man. She said, but it was too far, it would be too far away from Mother and Daddy. I didn't want to be that far away. So I said, okay. So then I asked her, I said, how did you meet Daddy? She said, oh, she said, your father was something. She said he was the in charge of the subway station, the electric subway station here. And he boarded with the Wright sisters over at the Sycamore. And they lost their cook. And so he took his meals then over with Mrs. Oh Lord, what was her name? She had a rooming house there. Anyway, and he would go there for his meals, but he'd noticed Mother, because Granddaddy's office was on the second floor of the bank, and the telephone office was up there on the same floor. And when my father had to make calls to Richmond, there were no public phones around, so he had to go up to the telephone office and make the calls from there to Richmond. And he would see Mother. He'd pass her on the stairway going up, and he noticed her, and he was quite intrigued with her. And so finally he asked Geraldine Pascalupi, who was the telephone operator, could he meet Mother, my mother. And she said, well, she said, Charles, she said, the family's awfully particular about who she meets, she said, because she's the mayor's daughter and so forth and so on. So anyway, he kept after her to make a meeting. So finally she called the house, and Mother answered the phone, and she said, Sarah, she said, there's a young man who wants to meet you here. And she said, would you like to come down to stop by the office when you come see your father? And Mother said, well, I have a guest. She said, well, bring him along. So Mother came down to the office, upstairs to the office with her friend, and my father was there, and he met her. And Geraldine took the scissors, and she cut a little bit of hair from the young man who was visiting Mother from New Jersey, the young doctor. He was blonde. He was light-haired. And he took a clip of my father's hair, which was dark. And she said, this is going to be important one of these days. Well, many years later, after Mother passed away, Mary Dario came over and handed me this little box. And in the box were the two clippings tied with a ribbon, each one with a ribbon, and they were the ribbons from the cuttings from the young men. And anyway, my father was with my mother and asked her to marry him 3 times. And mother refused him 3 times. And on the fourth time, she accepted him. I said to Mother one day, we were talking, and I said, "Why'd you marry Daddy, Mother?" She said, "Oh, he was such a wonderful dancer." I said, "Good Lord, did you expect to dance your life through the world?" She said, "What did I know? I thought rabbits laid eggs." My mother had quite a sense of humor. My father had a good sense of humor, and after my father passed away, I asked, and we came down to see Mary Sneed, who was Mother's cousin, and we were there for the weekend to spend it with Mary. And during luncheon, she said, "Sarah, you know, the home place is for sale." Mother said, "Oh." And she said, "Who owns it?" She said, "Well, Mr. and Ms. Walker." And she said, "It's a reasonable price." So my grandmother Fisher had passed away. No, she had not passed away at that point. And so Mother and I came down and looked at the house. And when we going home, I said, "Mother," I said, I'll buy the house and you and grandmother can live here. And she said, "I don't want to move your grandmother." I think she said, I said, "Well, it wouldn't make any difference with grandmother." She said, "Oh, no. I said, "But she would enjoy the porch." And she said, No, I won't do it." So a year or so later, grandmother Fisher passed away. Then the house became available again. And this was by Mr. McDonald. I think that was his name. He was the husband of, oh Lord, what was her name? Cawthorn, Tommy Cawthorn's sister. And they lived up in, up where I can't think of the plains now, but anyway, he bought the place for them to have a vacation home or a retirement home, so he would come down after he bought it, and he brought a folding chair, and he would sit out and look at the river. And Mr. McDonald passed away. He hadn't owned the house that long. And so his wife sold the house because her children and all were up and where they lived. And so she decided she didn't want to move back down here. So Mother and I were visiting Mary Sneed, and she said the house was for sale again. So I thought about it and talked to Mother, and Mother said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "Mother, all of your friends are dying off, or they're going to live with their children or retirement homes." And I said, "You can't drive a car. You don't drive a car anymore." And I said, "This is ridiculous." And the shopping centers moved out of town. So I told her, I said, I'm going to look into it. And I said, "I really think you should move back to Tappahannock because of the family. You've got family there and family across the river." And Mother said, "Well, you know, you can never go home again." I said, "As long as you know that, you can. You know, don't expect it to be like it was when you lived here." Right. So I called Gordon. I called Tommy Cawthorn's sister. I had her phone number. I got her phone number, and I told her I was interested in buying the house, and she said, "We'll talk to Gordon Lewis. He's handling." So I called Gordon, and he said, "I don't know anything about that." And I said, "Well, that's what she said." So he said, "Let me call her, and I'll talk to her, and I'll call you back." So he called me back, and he said, "Yes, I'm handling it, and it's for sale, and this is the cost, how much it costs, and so forth and so on." So I told Mother, I said, and she was giving me a little argument about it, and I said, no, you are going to move. I said, I'm working down at Virginia Beach, and it takes me longer to get up here to Northern Virginia than it would to get down to Tappahannock if something happens to you. So finally I convinced her to move. So she came down here, and she really was very happy because the family rallied around her, and some of her old schoolmates from St. Margaret's rallied around her. And she was really very, very pleased and everything, and until her health failed. And then it was, that just took time. But she seemed to be very happy here. I asked her one day, I said, "Are you glad that you moved to Tappahannock?" She said, "Yes." She said, "I'm so glad that you insisted that I move down here," she said, "because I'm much happier here." And that's how it was.
Tell us about when she was a student at St. Margaret's.
She was one of the students. The St. Margaret's was founded by my grandfather and Jim Lewis, who lived next door, and Mr. Anneton. They all had daughters, and they wanted a nice school for the daughters. They weren't pleased with the public school. And so my grandfather had a meeting with those gentlemen, and I think Mr. Crawley was involved too. And so they decided to take an option on Judge Wright's house, the building. That was the main building. And so Granddaddy went to see the bishop in Richmond, and the bishop said, "Well, I'm interested." He said, "But," he said, you will need to have a boys' school, a brother's school." He said, "And it can't be in the same town or county." So Granddaddy, one of his friends was Colonel John R. Saunders, who was Commonwealth's attorney of Matthews. And Granddaddy called him, and they talked about it, and he said, what's the idea of you having the boys' school in Matthews? And he said, "Oh, that sounds like," he said, I'll talk to the vestry of Christ Church. He attended Christ Church and was a worker in the church. And he presented the idea to them, and the people of the church said, "Oh, yes, we think that's a grand idea." And so he went to the bishop and explained that he had the people down in Matthews who would like to have the boys' school there. And so that was decided. So the diocese purchased St. Margaret's or Wright House, and then they purchased property and built the school down in Matthews. And the DuPonts, Ms. DuPont, was very liberal with her money to the school. She put a lot of money into that school. And the first 2 years, while they were adding on to the building for the dormitories and the kitchen and the dining room and the whatever, the classes were in in the store, second floor of the store on the corner of Prince and Water Lane, and they were there for 2 years. I've forgotten the name of the head mistress. She was there for 2 years, about 2 years, I think, and finally they moved in. Now, one of the things that that we had was the May Day at St. Margaret's was a big thing. The May Queen would arrive on the boat. It wasn't a fancy boat, but she'd arrive on the boat, and there was a big platform under the big live oak tree out in the front of the yard, on the riverside. It was a great big platform, and the senior class were all dressed in very gossamer, pastel flowing robes, evening clothes, I guess, and the Queen had her throne up there, the May Queen, and then there were groups that danced the minuet, and then they did the maypole, and the young children were the elves, and they were dressed like Robin Hoods. And after the the lady that played the piano at St. Margaret's, was the music director there. She played the piano, and the choir would sing, and any student that was studying violin or something like that would perform as part of the program. And it was really a very special thing, and the townspeople would come, and there was a big table over under the other tree, that after the activities, they had lemonade and cookies. Well, Polly B wore little pinafores with pockets. Well, Polly B would go along, and she'd eat as many cookies as she possibly could, and the others she'd put into in the pockets of her pinafore. And then at Christmas time, St. Margaret's had the Christmas pageant, and they would do a reenaction of the Nativity. And I remember the sheep were cut out, and they had cotton balls glued onto them, and they had made fig trees and stuff like that out of cardboard and painted it. And there was the mother and the Joseph and the wise men would come, and they sang all the Christmas songs, Little Town of Bethlehem, and so forth and so on. And Miss Carey played the piano again, and then again they had a long table at the end of the gymnasium, and the gymnasium had been donated by the DuPonts, and and that had they had hot chocolate and cookies, and the girls had over the years saved little boxes, and they got the boxes ready. There were three or four cookies in each box, and it was wrapped in Christmas paper and bows and everything, and they were put in Santa Claus's sack. Well, when Santa Claus would come in, he would distribute the little boxes to each one of the children that were there. We never knew who Santa Claus was. We never found out who Santa Claus was. But anyway, so that was another one of the big events at St. Margaret's. And then, of course, graduation was the third big event. It was really a very active part of the community. not like today. It was more activity with the community, part of the community. And the girls, young ladies, all went to St. John's. And all the students had to go on Sunday morning, and the girls were all dressed, and they took up the whole side, the whole right side of the church. And they were there every Sunday, and they had to come. And like when I went to Christ Church and when Howard went to Christ Church, we had to go to the regular church, and then we had to go to the evening services after dinner. This was very important. We all had to go, and it didn't matter whether you were Baptist, Catholic, or whatever. If you went to that school, you went to the service, to chapel, and one of the funny things was I was very fond of Zach, the ferryman, who the ferry was not operating because the bridge had been built, but he was running the farm for Granddaddy. And Mother told me one day, she said, Zach's coming over. He would come over on an old skiff with a basket of vegetables or fish or whatever he had from the farm. And he had an old skiff, and he would, you know what sculling is, and Zach could scull across the river almost to the speed of a one cylinder outboard motor. He was so good at it. And he was a dark Negro, and he wore an old felt Fidel hat. The ribbon was gone, but it had the sweat line there. And he had arms like small hams and big hands. And so Mother told me Zach was coming over. Well, I got very excited. I always wanted to see Zach, so I went down to the old ferry wharf, which was still there at that point. And I waved to Zach, and he waved back. And anyway, he came and tied up, and he was getting things out of the skiff, the baskets of food and whatever. And I looked up the hill, and here came these people, these black folks, all dressed in white, singing, "Gather at the river, gather at the river." And they were coming down, and I looked at it, and I said, there was leading a black fellow, tall black fellow, all in white, carrying a book in front of him, open. And he got down to the river, and he handed the book to one of the ladies, and he called each person in, and he would take them out in the water. He'd put his hand on his chest and a hand on his back, and he'd dunk them. And then they'd shout hallelujah, and we've been saved, and thank God, and there was all this going on. And I was standing on the dock looking at it, and I said, Zach, what are they doing? Is he washing them? And Zach said, no. He said, he's baptizing them. I said, baptized? He said, yes. He said, yeah, they're being saved. I said, oh, okay. So I said, have you been baptized? He said, oh, mercy me, yes, I've been baptized at least 3 times. And he said, you been baptized? And I said, I don't know. He said, hold up your hands all the way up. So he took my hands by my elbows and dropped me down in the river up to my chest and brought me out. And he said, you've been baptized, you've been saved. So I went up to the house, and he went around to the back of the house to the kitchen door, and I went up on the porch where Mother was, and I was soaking wet. Mother looked at me, she said, what did you do, fall in the water, in the river? I said, no. I said, Zach baptized me. She said, he baptized us. She said, oh, mercy. She said, you were baptized at St. John's Church when you were a baby. She said, well, I don't suppose the second one will hard do you any harm. And
What about the steamboats? Do you remember those?
the steamboat, oh yes, the steamboat was very popular for us children because we would always run down to see the steamboat dock. And Smut, I told you a little bit about Smut before, but Smut, when he was an adult dog, he was a German police dog, and when the steamboat would come up and it would go 2 toots, it was going to dock. If it was 1 toot, it was going through the bridge, so they had to open the drawbridge. But if it was 2 toots, it was going to dock. You could not hold that dog down. You had to open the doors and let him down. He'd go tearing out and down to the wharf and out onto the wharf, and when the steamboat was coming in and docked, they would throw the ropes over, and Smut would get him by his teeth and hold him so the sailors could get a hold of him. And they would tie up, and Smut was always the first one aboard the steamboat. And we always suspected the reason he was the first one is that the chef or the cook gave him a little tidbit. And one experience was that one of the new sailors on the ship, on the steamboat, decided that he would like to have Smut. He thought he was a wonderful dog. So he locked him in one of the cabins, in the empty cabins. And the steamboat started to move off, and Smut started yelling and jumping up, clawing on the door and so forth. So one of the sailors, one of the older sailors, came to see what the problem was, and he opened the door, and Smut dashed out of the cabin, and they were about around Richmond Beach, and he jumped overboard and swam back across to the beach and came back on home. And then once the captain found out that this young man, the young sailor, tried to kidnap Smut, he was fired because Smut was quite special to the steamboat people. And the other thing about Smut was Mother always said, if you want to know where deShields is, just walk up the street, and where you see Smut, that's where he is. And that was true. He was always with me. And one time, Mother and some of her friends were sitting on the porch, and I must have been about 6 or 7, I guess it was. And I was down on the beach, and Smut was with me. And one of our friends said, Sarah, you let deShields go down there by himself? Oh, Mother said, oh, don't worry about it. Smut takes care of him. So I started wading out in the water, and I got out about to my crotch, and Smut comes out of the water and grabs with the back of my little shorts and pulls me back off out of the water onto the shore. And I was chasing him, and Smut thought this was a fun thing to do, so he would romp around and yap and do this, and I did 2 or 3 times, and he each time he'd come out and pull me back, and finally I just gave up because I couldn't do any. Smut was there, but he was always with me. And
what breed of dog was he, and what did he look like?
Huh?
What breed of dog?
He was a German police dog. The German police dogs were the ones that the police shepherd dogs came from. They were through the thing. And when Mother was married, she came down these steps, and Granddaddy and Smut were waiting for her at the bottom of the steps. And they walked all over. Smut went over with her, and Grandmother had a high serving table, and Dr. Osborne brought the cross and the candles and put them on that table. And so Smut came with Mother, with Granddaddy, and turned Mother over to my father for the wedding, and Smut sat there beside her. And Mother looked up and out the windows, because it was right there, and she saw all these black faces, and the black folks had come to see the mayor's daughter get married. And Grandmother had sent some cider and cookies out for them, and because they had the reception in here. And then when Granddaddy married his second wife, who was quite young, she was younger than my mother. She had been his secretary. And when he married Thelma, Smut left the house. He went over to Aunt Emily's. And Granddaddy tried to get Smut to come back here, and he wouldn't come back. He'd come as far as the fence, and then he'd turn and go back. Something happened. We never knew what Thelma did or whatever had happened, but Smut didn't want anything to do with her. And so she then lived with Aunt Emily and Mary Sneed. And when Granddaddy died, Smut was with Mother in the church, went in the church with her and my father, and sat beside her. And then after the church service, they brought the casket out, and Mother and my father and Smut followed them, and he sat beside Mother as my grandfather was buried. And then Aunt Emily and her sisters, there was Aunt Annie and there's Aunt Jo, having a party, the reception at the Sneed house. And after the people had gone home or whatever, Aunt Emily took the scraps and put them in Smut's dish out on the porch, back porch, for him to eat. And she noticed later in the evening that he never showed up. He hadn't touched his food. And Mother went out and called him, and he didn't come, and he didn't show up that night. That was very rare, because he was always at home at night, and he'd be in the house at night. And Aunt Emily always gave Uncle Tom, he was a sexton, a black fella of St. John's. She always fixed his breakfast for him. And Uncle John was there, and Aunt Emily asked him, had he seen Smut? He said, no, he hadn't seen him. And she said, oh, he hasn't shown up, and we hope he hasn't been hit by a car or something like that. Well, this went on for 3 days. And finally, Uncle John, the third morning, said, Miss Emily, I said, I done seen him. What do you mean you done seen him? She said, I done seen Smut. She said, oh dear, where is he? She said, oh, he up laying on Mayor deShields' grave. And she said, he is? She said, don't you think we ought to go get him? He said, no, leave him alone. He'll come on back home when he's ready. Well, later that evening, he did come back to the house. And Smut continued living with Aunt Emily for a number of years. He got quite old, and he lost the muscles in his back legs, and they had to pick him up and carry him, and they just couldn't do it. So Mary called Mother, and she said, Sarah, she said, she explained the situation to her. She said, we have to do something about Smut. And Mother said, well, she said, I guess you're going to have to put him down. And Mother said, oh, I know. She said, he's been such a part of our family. So anyway, they put him to sleep, and they brought him over here, back over here, and buried him by Grandmother's iris bed, so he could look out on the river. And so that was the end of Smut. but he was a very faithful animal. And when we would come to visit Aunt Emily and Mary, and he would be sitting on the porch, he would just jump and whoop and carry on and come and lick our hands. And when he was living at with Aunt Emily, Granddaddy would come out by the down over to Prince Street, was going up to his office at the bank, and Smut would sitting on the porch waiting for him, and would cross the street, go with him, and they'd go up to Pascalupi's meat market. Mr. Pascalupi always had a little treat for Smut. They went up to his office, and in the hot days, Smut would lay out in the hall where there was a breeze, and in the winter he would get in Granddaddy's desk under the keyhole desk, you know, the desk, and that's where he would stay, and that was a routine. And then when Granddaddy would come home for his midday dinner, Smut would follow him, get to Aunt Emily's. He'd cross the street, sit on the porch, wait until Granddaddy came back, and when he would get in front of Aunt Emily's, Smut would cross the road, cross Prince Street, and go with him up to the office. And there was a routine, but he would not go back to the house. And they did that for several years until Granddaddy died. And the showboat, I remember the showboat. That was very special. And when my grandmother died, I think I was about 4 and a half, and Mother was here. That's when she and I had moved down here to be with Granddaddy. And we decided Mother and Granddaddy were going to go to the showboat, see the showboat. They took me along, and Granddaddy sat in one of the boxes. They had 2 boxes, one on stage right, one on stage left, and the colors were sort of, they had a red carpet, and they had a lot of big chandeliers and all, and we were watching the show, and at intermission, Captain Hunter and Beulah, she was the lady star, came up to the box, and they had a great big teddy bear. It was as big as I was. He was huge, and they gave me the teddy bear at the intermission. And I don't know whatever happened to that teddy bear, but he was huge. I remember that. And it was sort of, I guess, compensation because I'd lost my grandmother, and they were very close. My grandmother, when I was a small child, I had a game with her. It was called Sit on Steps. It was the steps here. And I'd sit on the steps and on my little fanny, and I'd move up 3 steps. And I'd pat the next to me, and I'd say, "Grandma, come sit." She would. And then I'd go down 2 steps, and I'd say, "Grandma, come sit." Well, this went on for 15 minutes. And the other thing that she did was, we were sitting out in the hall, and Mariana, the housekeeper and so forth, had just dusted, and the sunlight was shining through that door, and the dust parcels were sort of floating in the air, and it was like a shaft of light. And I said to my grandmother, I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Oh, that's the angel's staircase." I said, "Oh?" She said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "That's what the angels do to go up and down." And I said, "Oh, boy, can I go up?" And she said, No, only the angels can go up that staircase." So, and then on another occasion, my grandparents had a yacht, a little yacht, and it had a big fan back in the back, and it had rocking chairs and things and chairs on that fantail, and they were wicker. And the hurricane came, and the Lena, that was the name of the boat, sunk. But several of the chairs floated in on the there on the front of the house on the beach, and grandmother had the houseman get them, and they repainted them, and she got new cushions for them, and she put them on the porch. There were two of them, and grandmother would come out on the porch with me, and she would take the two chairs and she would fold them over so the two tops touched each other, and the arms were down, and she put the cushions inside of the chairs. And she said, that was my little house. I'd go in my little house. And she would come and on her knees, had get on her knees and knock on the floor, and she said, I've come to visit. And she said, I've come to visit, we're going to have tea. So she intimated that she not mind having tea, and she said, would you like some tea? And I would copy her, do what she says. And then she would say, well, she said, I think I've visited long enough, and I think I have to go and do such and such. She said, why don't you lay down in your little house? So I did. That was her way of getting me to take a nap in the afternoon.
So you had a career in the theater. Tell us about how you got started.
Well, that started, I'd always been interested in the theater. The grandmother and grandfather deShields at earlier part in their lives took the steamboats up to New York, and grandmother had some friends up there, and they would visit, and they'd go to the opera. They liked opera. Granddaddy and grandmother had quite a collection of records of some of the famous opera singers. And anyway, and then my Fisher grandparents, when they were in Buffalo, were a young married couple. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but they would go and be extras on stage of their theater shows. And they would talk about it. And then Mother had studied ballet. So I guess it was part of my blood, I don't know. So I had started going to I started with the Common Glory. I wrote William Wright, who was part of the Common Glory down in Williamsburg. He was on the board or something, and told him I would like to join the Common Glory, and what could he do for me. So I got a letter saying that I was invited for an audition with Howard Scammon. So I went for the audition, and I didn't get a principal role, but I got a role as townspeople and dancer and so forth and so on. And I spent a year, that summer there. And the next year, and I started going to classes at William and Mary. And then when I'd finished the summer, I decided that William and Mary was not for me. That was for the school teachers and people like that. I was more interested in the arts part of it. So I went to VPI, Richmond Professional Institute, which is ended up as CVU. And it was an art school. And they had a drama department, they had a music department, they had an art department. And the program with the theater was really all comprehensive. We had to do costumes. We had to really put together a complete show. We had to choose a play. We had to do the costumes, design costumes for it. We had to do the light design. We had to do the stage design and everything. It was a wonderful, wonderful program. And I was in The Mad Woman of Chaillot, and I played the deaf mute. And then after that, that winter, I got a draft notice. So I couldn't go back. I had to go to the Army, and I was in the Army. And then when I finished there, I went to Washington, and I went to the Institute of Contemporary Arts, which was a school that had been established, an art school, and they had modern dance, they had interpretation, they had psychiatry, reference to building a character, and we studied Stanislavski and so forth and so on. And I was there for 2 years, and the school got closed down because of what was the name of the senator who was yelling and screaming about communists.
McCarthy?
Huh?
McCarthy?
Yes, McCarthy. He used his power to close the school down because he said it was a communist bed. Well, it wasn't any communist bed. Eventually, the school was dormant for several years, and then it opened up in New York as the New School. That was the beginning of the New School. By then, I was in New York, and I was part of the off-Broadway movement. I played Tom in Glass Menagerie, the first revival. It was down in the Village, and we were in a Methodist church that had a basement that had stage and everything, and that was the beginning. And from there, I would go to get involved with other off-Broadway stuff, and then I went to summer stock. The first one was in Kentucky. I went there to the Pioneer Playhouse, and then I went to where was the other one? Anyway, I Pioneer Playhouse. I went to Malden Bridge, which was quite successful for me, and I got my equity card there. And then the following summer, I went to Binghamton, New York, to the summer stock theater there, and that's when I played opposite Veronica Lake. I played her husband. A funny story about that is I met her and I thought, oh Lord, this is the peekaboo girl, you know, and I thought, whoa. She was very tiny, and she looked much younger than she really was. I mean, she really was very attractive. And so we were having our first rehearsal, and my position was we were a strained couple, and I wanted to get her back as my wife. So we started our first rehearsal, and the director said, we were going through the lines, and I took her hand and I kissed her hand. And the director said, that won't do. I want you to kiss her on the mouth. I thought, oh, Lord, okay. I'm going to kiss Veronica Lake. Okay. So I get ready, and I lean over, and I give her a nice little peck, you know. And he said, that won't do. That won't get her back. He said, I want you to kiss her with a little passion. I thought, passion with Veronica Lake? Oh, my God. So anyway, I said, all right. So I took her, and I kissed her again with a little passion. And she looked at me, she shook her head, she said, that will not get me back. I said, oh. She said, you really have to kiss me. Whoop, here we go. So I thought, okay. So I thought, I took her and I grabbed her and I put my hand behind her and I bent her over and I kissed her and I tongued her. And she got up and she said, that'll do it. And when we did it in the theater as a play, the audience went crazy with it. They were always clapping and doing cat calls and all when I kissed her like that. That was a big deal. She was a lovely, lovely, sweet person. The problem she had was alcohol. I didn't see any signs of her when she was with us, but she later ended up being a bartender in one of New York's boarding holes. And the last time I heard, she died. And I was very sorry because she was very friendly, and I should have kept up a friendship with her, but I didn't. And I was really, she was very sweet and very nice person. And I did the leading role in Tea House of the August Moon in Malden Bridge. And I got some wonderful reviews on it, and that's how I got to the New York, the other New York's summer stock in Binghamton was, they booked me in to do Tea House of the August Moon again. That was that's why they hired me. And then when I was there, Veronica Lake came in and they continued me being there. And I was then from there, we had a lot of British actors coming in, and it was a little hard for American actors to get roles, decent roles. And my roommate saw it. We were both didn't have jobs at that point. We saw an ad in the actors' trade paper, a position for marionettes, puppets. And they wanted a puppeteer and a also a technical person. So Byron called him and set up the appointment, and we went and met Ruth Waxman down in the Village. And she showed us how to operate. Well, they were very easy to operate. And so she was very pleased that Byron had technical experience, and he was going to be puppeteer, but he was going to run the music and the this and the lights and so forth and so on. And she hired me as a puppeteer, and she had me do the manager of there were three of us, traveled all over. We would do the school system, elementary schools, and we would do the fairy tales. And we did that for 2 years, I think, the schools. And it would cover New York City, Connecticut, part of New Jersey, and part of Long Island. And we did that for 2 years. And then she asked us if we would like to go on the national tour. And we said yes. And there was a young lady with us. There were 3 of us. And we decided, yes, we would do that. So we would start in the fall in the northern part of the county, like Pennsylvania and so forth. And then as the winter would come in, we would move down south, further south, so it ended up in Florida. And it was about 2 months we'd spend, and the salary was excellent. And I was manager of the company, and I had to deal with the people who sponsored us, and I had to talk to the sponsor and so forth and so on. And it really was a very good situation because the salary was fine. And then we approached her and said, why don't we do a national thing? And she said, well, all right. And so she set it up, and we went to San Francisco, started in California, and from there we went on down to Arizona and that part of the country, then into Texas, and then Louisiana and Mississippi, and picked up on the old Florida, and then would come east, come north back to New York. It was a 3-month trip. We had Christmas off. We had the week of Christmas off, so we could spend that. And it was really, I think it was 5 years. It was really a delightful relationship. Ruth was a wonderful person to work with, and she was very kind, and she and her husband were Jewish, and they lived in where did they live? They lived in Long Island, and in a Jewish neighborhood. And Ruth was raised as an authentic Jewish person, but she had decided she wanted to go into the Christian Science. And she was a Christian Science, but her husband, David Waxman, was very much a Jewish person. He was very good about every morning he would go to temple before he went to work. But Ruth loved Christmas. It was the only house in the Jewish neighborhood that was decorated with lights at Christmas. And Ruth had a big Christmas tree, all decorated, and David called it the Hanukkah bush. But she always had lovely gifts for us, and then we had a buffet dinner there for us. It was really a very wonderful experience, and she was very, very good to us, and when we were down in Texas for Easter, the schools were closed, and so we asked her, could we go over to Mexico? She said yes. She said just store the stage and everything and the puppets in a storage place, and you could go on down to Texas. I mean into Mexico, which is what we did. We were down in Mexico for a week, and we had a wonderful time. And we came back, and the lady with us was a dear friend, and Virginia had an orange sitting on the board, on the dashboard. And when we got to the border, the border man said, "Well, you can't take that in. You can't take that into the state." And Virginia looked at him. She said, "Oh, yes, I can." And she peeled the orange and ate it. And then the mother's health was not real good, and I was getting concerned about it. So I told her that I thought I ought to get closer to her. So I said I was going to look for a job. And she said, "Well, why don't you go to Richmond?" I said, "I don't want to go to Richmond, Mother." I said, "The humidity is terrible, and I hate Richmond, and it's not one of my fond places." I said, "I think I'll go to Hampton Roads, because we've got about four cities down there, and there's Williamsburg and Hampton and Newport News and Norfolk, and I said, I think I'd stand a better chance of getting a job, because there would be more opportunity there." So I went down, and I was in Virginia Beach, and I had a job doing promotion for a cemetery. And that was interesting. It was for a year, but then the city of Virginia Beach built their first recreation center, and it had a theater in it. And they had heard about me, that my background, a friend of mine, and she was with Parks and Recreation, and when they had the theater was finished, she said, "You ought to go get Henry deShields Fisher for the theater." So I had an interview with him, and I eventually became the artistic director of the theater. And we had a ballet company, we had a modern dance company, we had a children's play company, we had a teen company, we had an adult company. We also had puppets. We had a reader's theater for seniors, and it was quite an operation we had. And we started with Shakespeare, and so we added the Shakespeare, and we had that evolved in the Shakespeare Festival, and that was there for 3 years, and it was doing quite well, except budget and all, and the town stopped financing it. The city stopped financing it, and of course that was the end of it, which was a shame. And then after 3 years, I was with Shakespeare and artistic director. I had come to the point where I could retire, and so I retired at 60, and I moved up here full time, and that's the whole theater thing. Mm-hmm. And I had a dear friend of mine who had been in theater, she was the lady that ate the orange. And Virginia Anton, I knew her in New York, and she came and did the Belle of Amherst for us, and she also did the mother on Glass Menagerie. Virginia was very, very talented, and but her Belle of Amherst was wonderful. It really was. And she was our guest artist. She came twice. Well, is there anything else you want to know?
Well, we want to hear more about the starting the museum, but I think we're going to save that for another time.
Yes, I think that would be, because there's so many details about that
Right,
that people don't know about.
right.
But no, I've been really very, very fortunate, and I've had really a very wonderful life. It's been very rewarding. I've had rewarding moments. It's just, you wouldn't think somebody with no connections basically would end up doing what I did, because I did very well. I was in Inherit the Wind on Broadway with what's his name? Oh Lord, some of this, I get a little annoyed with some of these things that slip my mind. And I was in Andorra with Horst Buchholz, and I was also at City Center doing Good Soldier Schweik. So I've had, and then there was an little off-Broadway theater that concentrated on Shakespeare. They did cut versions of Shakespeare. It was the Renaissance Theater, and I was there. I did Hamlet there. I did Macbeth, and I did Oberon, Midsummer Night's Dream. Paul Buni was with the Wind play.
Right.
And I took some classes with Mira Rostova, who was our teacher. I was with her for about a year, I guess, classes.
What was your very favorite role that you played?
Tea House of the August Moon. I love playing Zucchini, and I had very good reviews both theaters. I really love, and the other one was Glass Menagerie. That was the other one that I really enjoyed and loved. And the Shakespeare roles that I played, but they were cut roles. They weren't full. They were cut. The director was the husband of Sidney Shields' lady, and she had been in Richard III with John Barrymore, and he was running the little Renaissance theater, and I worked with her a little bit on Shakespeare, and she was a delightful person. I auditioned for the Actors Studio, and I did not get it. I did the scene from Glass Menagerie, and we think politics entered into it because I had Maida Reed, an actress, Broadway actress, and she was a noted Republican. And she warned me. She said, listen, you better not use me because, you know, the Actors Studio, they're all Democrats. She said, they're not going to want. So I said, oh, come on, Maida. I said, it shouldn't make any difference, but I think it did. Mm-hmm. But she was the Zazrak lady in the play, Male Animal. Maida was wonderful. And I joined the Episcopal Actors Guild. That was a little church around the corner, Transfiguration. And I'm still a member of it. And we did a puppet show for them, for the members. And I met some of the old actresses and actors who were retired through big there because a lot of them joined there, and that was interesting. I really enjoyed working for Ruth Waxman. She and her and a Hanukkah bush. We always laughed about that. And she always gave us, there were two companies. The one was the city, and our company, which traveled all over. And she always gave us beautiful, I mean, really lovely Christmas gifts. She really was very sweet. And the house was, David was a really dyed-in-the-wool Jewish person. As I told you, he would go every morning before he went to work to do synagogue. And Ruth had a kosher house, two refrigerators, two stoves, two sets of china, two sets of flatware, two sets of pots and pans and things as they had. She kept it for David. She had two children. They had two children, and they were early teenagers, as I remember. The other thing that was sort of funny, when I was about, I guess I was about 7 years old. That was the year we moved back up to Herndon. But that summer, and that's when I think that's the summer that's the winter I started in the first grade of the new school, and my father wanted us both up north, up in Fairfax County, because he was tired of traveling down on weekends.
So you started first grade here in Tappahannock, but then you went to Northern Virginia, and is that where you finished?
Yeah, I went to Northern Virginia and then I went to Christ Church.
Okay.
But Granddaddy had an old skiff, battered old skiff, and so he got a hold of Zach, and Zach got a bamboo pole and secured it as a mast on the skiff. And then Aunt Emily had these round wooden portiere things, and so she sewed up an old sheet and attached the rings and a pulley at the top, and we could raise the thing, and it had a batten across the bottom. And then he put a board down for a rudder, and he cut off a broomstick and attached it, and that was our boat, our little boat. And Dorothy and Charles and Smut and I would get in the boat. Polly B wouldn't get in the boat with us. She would follow us up and down the shoreline. We weren't allowed to go out any further than the mid part of the steamboat wharf, because we could still walk out. Water would be just up to our chests. And we were told that when we saw that ball of black water coming down the river, we should go into shore. No matter where we were, we had to go in. We couldn't go any further than the creek at Miss Hale's, and we could go down to Hoskins Creek. That was our area. And but we thought we had the Queen Mary. But Polly B would follow us. She'd never get in the boat with us. But Charles and Smut and sometimes Tommy Carthon would, and that was a fun thing. I only had that the last summer I was here. Mm-hmm. After Granddaddy died, after he married, Thelma Wilkerson. When I was when Granddaddy was at home, she was just all honey and sweet and everything. But when I was here with her by myself, she was a little difficult. You know, as you think back on it, what did she want a snot-nosed kid around her when she's the new wife of the mayor? So and so that's what I called. I went over to Aunt Emily's and I said, "Aunt Emily, would you call Mother and tell her I want to go home?" So that was that summer. And so my parents came down and got me and they took me to Richmond, to my grandparents in Richmond. And my extend with them was longer because I'd only spent a week or so with them, but then I was able to spend 4 weeks with them. And my grandmother, Fisher, was just very special. She decided that she was going to educate me. So we would take and go to she took me to the Capitol to see the Capitol. She took me she got an appointment so I could see the governor's mansion, and we went to St. Paul's Church. We went to the Jefferson Hotel so I could see the baby alligators in the pond, and she took me to the John Marshall House. She took me to the Confederate Museum. She took me to the Confederate White House. She took me to the Poe Cottage, and we would go and take lunch, sandwiches, and go sit in the park, and once in a while we would go to Walworth's counter and have lunch, and then on very special occasions when Mother was down, we would go to the tea room at Millard Rhodes. So that was a real treat. And we went to the where the theater had been, the church. The theater burned down, and they had the church there. And then we went to we went to the Virginia Museum, which wasn't as good as it is today, and there was the Confederate soldiers' home. There were a few of the Confederate soldiers still left, and Grandmother took me there to meet. They had an anniversary to meet one of the old Confederates, to meet the Confederate soldiers. And one old gentleman was very nice, and he had me to sit with him, and he would talk about the Civil War, and they had medals to commemorate the event, and so he gave me his medal. It's in the museum. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of our little tour, whatever we saw, we always ended at the Broad Street Railroad Station, which is now the Science Museum. And because I love trains, and they had the balcony that had where you could stand on the street and you could see the trains come in and the trains go out. So my grandmother would take me there to see the trains. We'd end up there at the Broad Street Station, and I know she was a heavy-set woman, and I know her feet must have been killing her. And and the other thing we would do would meet my Grandfather Fisher, on occasion at what was his name? The cafeteria.
Hot shop.
Huh?
Hot shop.
No, it wasn't a hot shop. This was I can't remember the name offhand, but anyway, we would meet him and have dinner at the at the little restaurant. And one of the things I remember so well in Holland Park, what a beautiful area it was, and it was just everybody. The lawns were always cut, and the flowers and everything. It was and there was a park, half a block away, Holland Park, and it had a big sandbox in it, and I'd go there. It had a seesaw and swings and things. I could go there and play, and then I would meet my grandfather when he would get off the streetcar. I'd meet him at the end of the street, end of the block, and walk with him up to the house. I love the streetcars, and I love to sit in the back of the streetcar because when it would go around the bend, it would sort of swing you around, and I love that. But I wasn't supposed to because of Jim Crow. That was for the black folk, and there was one lady, black lady. I'd go head for the back. My grandmother had come get me and take me up, sit up close up to the front, and this lovely black lady had noticed that I liked to sit back, and so she said to my grandmother, she said, "I'll take him to the back, and he can sit with me." So that's what she did. So I got my treat to go, woo! When the streetcar was string around. And I remember Granddaddy took me several times to the Richmond Market, which was on, it was on Marshall Street. No, maybe it was on Lower Broad. And it was a big brick building, and they had vegetables. They had baskets and things. They had wooden toys. They had 2 butcher shops. They had a couple of bake shops in it, and there would be pens with chickens and ducks, and other pens would be with calves and cow, and even sheep and so forth and so on. And I loved going to the market. And there was even tablecloths and things like that people had made. It was really quite an extensive thing, and I loved going. And you could hear them shouting back and forth to each other. And my grandfather knew some of the people, and we'd take the knitted bags, and they'd get eggs and some vegetables and some meat and bread there, and we'd get on the streetcar and go back. Well, the streetcar in those days, if you had your ticket, you could transfer from one streetcar to another, and it didn't cost you anything. And if you also had your ticket and you kept it, and you go to the market, and you want to go home, you show your ticket when you get on the streetcar to go home, and you didn't have to pay anything. And one of the treats that my grandfather gave me, Grandfather Fisher, is when we would the streetcar would round the corner to go on Holland Park, on First Avenue. There was a Heinz ice cream store there, and we would get off, and we'd go and we would have ice cream, and then we'd go get back on the streetcar, which didn't cost us anything, and go on home. That's some of the things I remember.
What about the Riverside Hotel here in Tappahannock? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I remember that on Sunday morning, not every Sunday morning, but on Sunday morning, particularly in the summertime, they had big French doors that were all open onto the big porch. And the dining room is where the French doors were. And on Sunday morning, sometimes we would go there for breakfast. And the tables were in the dining room, and they had the beautiful, the very crisp tablecloths, white linen style tablecloths with napkins, and the glasses were all very sparkly, and everything. And there was a waiter, tall black fella with white hair. And when we would go in and sit down with my grandparents, he would come over and greet my grandfather, say, "How are you, Mr. Mayor?" And he said, "Uh-oh, look who's here." And he'd say, "It's the spoon bread boy," because that's all I wanted was spoon bread. And I love spoon bread to this day. Larry's used to have spoon bread. And when my mother's health was good, we'd go, and I'd visit on Sunday. We'd go to Larry's for dinner, which she enjoyed. And but the holidays, Larry's Easter, or not Easter, well, yeah, Easter, but Thanksgiving was the big deal with them. It'd be a line of people out in the parking lot trying to get in. But we never did it because we were with the family. We would be with the family. But mother also volunteered with the library, the Women's Club, where the Women's Club used to be, or is. That's where the library used to be. And she joined some of the women's club organizations and things. She was a past matron of the Eastern Star up in Herndon, but she didn't get involved with the Eastern Star down here. I don't know why. I think she was just getting weary, because she was very active up in Herndon in the St. Timothy's Church, raising money for the new parish hall. She worked very hard on that. Yeah, but both my mother and my father had a great sense of humor. Mother's sense of humor, I think, came from her grandfather. He had a great sense of humor. Oh, one of the other things, these stories that's sort of funny, is I was a little fella, and Granddaddy said to me one evening, he said, "You want to go on a special trip?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay." So he took me out. We got in his car, and we went out onto Queen Street, went up to 17, and went out to around Corrette, somewhere around Corrette. I don't remember exactly. No, it wasn't Corrette. It was, no, it was the, the black neighborhood up there. What's it called? Anyway.
Battery?
Huh? Battery. Yes, we went to the Battery. And Granddaddy stopped the car at the store. Mrs. I forget her name, ran the store, and she was sort of mayor, judge, and everything. You couldn't get into the Battery without her permission. And Granddaddy would toot his horn, and she'd come out and look at him, and she'd wave him on. We'd go on up the dirt road, and he'd come to this little lane, and he'd turn into the lane. And in the lane, and there was a little cabin at the end of the lane. And Granddaddy went, and then he would flicker the lights on the car. And the door would open, and you'd see this big fella silhouetted in the door. And he then went back into the cabin and came back out to the car, and he had a paper bag with something in it. And he spoke to my grandfather, and they chatted and wanted to know how grandmother was and how granddaddy asked how his family was, and it was fine. And he said, "Oh, I see you got your little grandson with you." And granddaddy said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what do you think he's going to be when he grows up?" And he says, "Well, he keeps telling us he wants to be an admiral because he wants to run the boats." And the black fellow said, "Well, I'll bet he'll be a great admiral." So then we'd come on back home. But Granddaddy had to stop and blew his horn so she could let us go through. I've forgotten her name. What was her name? Oh, Lord. I have these moments of, I call them senior sentences, senior moments, which I didn't have. But anyway, that was our secret mission. And the other thing that Granddaddy had 2 oyster beds over on the farm across the river, and I loved oysters. And my grandmother would say, I was a little fellow, she'd hand him a little porcelain bucket, and she'd say, "Henry, go out and get me some oysters. I'm going to fix oysters." And he had in Jim Lewis's barn, they kept a cow. And Granddaddy, there was room for him to park his car in the garage. There was a garage there, and there was a little lean-to attached to it. And in the lean-to was a barrel full of oysters. And Zach's boys would bring the barrel over, and they would do it in oysters and river grass, oysters, river grass, and so forth in layers, and then put river water in the barrel and put a top on it. And on a board, it was a beam, there was Tabasco sauce, there was vinegar, there was Granddaddy's oyster gloves, there was his oyster knife, and there was a jar with cornmeal in it. Well, we'd go out there, and Granddaddy there were 2 buckets. One bucket was for the river grass, and the other bucket was for river shells. The river shells, when we'd leave, would go on the driveway, and the river grass, they had chickens at that point, would go in the chicken yard. And Granddaddy would open an oyster and say, one for the boy, one for the mayor, and one for the bucket. And that would go around. Then later, one time he was going to Richmond, and he was taking me. I went with him, and we went to the Ruger's Hotel that was down at the bottom of the hill. And it's not Ruger's anymore, but anyway, and they had a tap room in the basement. And you could enter the basement off the main street, Bank Street, I think it was. And we'd go down, and there was a big, long bar, and there was, behind the bar were cubby holes, and there were bottles in there, and they had names on them, and you had to. Virginia was a dry state. They couldn't sell liquor, but if you were a member of a place, you could have liquor, but you couldn't take it at home. You had to keep it in the place, and that's what the cubby holes were for. And Granddaddy had a meeting with one of the senators, and he took me and he sat me up on the bar, which is a long bar, and he told the man behind the bar, he said, give him as many oysters as he wants. So the granddaddy had his business with the state senator. They had a drink, and the granddaddy went back and said, how much do I owe you? And I think it was 5 cents an oyster. I can't remember, but I think that's what it was. And the black fella said, well, Mr. Mayor said, I'm going to tell you, he said, this boy could eat oysters faster than I could shuck them. He said, and I don't know how many. He said he ate a pound of oysters. And so, yeah, Granddaddy paid him, and we came on back home.
So this was in Richmond?
This was in Richmond, Ruger's Hotel. It was at the foot of the Capitol. Okay. It was a hotel on that corner. I think it's Bank Street. I'm not sure.
And this was Mayor deShields that took you
Yeah,
there.
That was my grandfather. And he had a meeting with one of the state senators, and he took me. The car was a Hupmobile. It had wooden spokes and rubber tires, solid rubber tires. They weren't the air things. It was maroon and black. And the only way I could see out of it, I had to stand in the first front seat. That's how I could see out of it. We didn't have any safety belts or anything in those days. But then we didn't go very fast either. I think the top speed was 45 miles an hour or something like that. But also, one of my grandfather's great friends was Senator Carter Glass, and they had been at the University of Richmond Law School together. Oh, and at one point, Mother was princess at the Apple Blossom Festival. She was Miss Essex, Princess Essex, and Carter Glass arranged that. So Mother represented Essex County. And she told me all about it, going there. Well, when I was little and we went to church, they always took me to church with them. And sometime I would lay down on the pew and put my head in my grandmother's lap. And my uncle, Leonard Henley, he was married to Aunt Jo, my grandfather's sister, youngest sister. He was superintendent of Sunday school. And Sunday school then was quite something, not like today. Not much there. And Aunt Emily's husband, the Sneeds were very, very active in St. John's. She'd make the leavened bread for communion, and her husband or Uncle Leonard would build the fire in the wintertime in the stove in the church on Saturday, so it'd be warm and then they'd bank it so it'd be warm on Sunday morning for people in the winter. It'd take the chill off of it. I remember doing that. As I said, I really have had a wonderful life compared to what other people have seen. I had the opportunity to do things that ordinary person wouldn't have the opportunity to do, and it was great fun. And It was very educational. There were sections that were very educational. Well, can't think of anything else. I've sort of emptied the vial.
Thank you so much for sharing all this with us. We appreciate
Well,
it.
I hope I didn't spend too much of your
No,
time.
no. It's very good.
Did I answer all the questions?
I think so. I think you did.